CrossFitters always want us as coaches to shut up about handstand holds. And I get it. They want us to hurry up and get them to walking as soon as they can. And I think a lot of coaches are pretty happy to oblige for a couple of reasons. One being that probably a lot of coaches can't really handstand hold either. So they don't really trust the progressions that they know for handstand holds because it may not have worked for them. And two, they don't really understand the difference between and sequencing of the steps that you use to learn handstand holds and handstand walks, so they don't know how to apply it to their members. And trust me, there are differences. On the flip side, really proper gymnastics coaches in the CrossFit space might say you have to hold for 10 or 30 seconds before you're allowed to start handstand walking. I don't do that. Instead, I'm just looking for skill competency in 3 areas before we begin to walk. And I think that you can see competency in those things long before we reach a 10 or 30 second hold. In today's video, we're going to go over what those 3 skill components are and my 10 favorite drills for how you can learn and apply them to your members. Once you're confidently holding and walking, you'll find it a lot easier to help your members get there too. There's really only 3 things you need to be good at handstand holds and walks in the CrossFit space. The first one is being able to keep your center of mass in the middle of your hand, not just the outside of your hand. The second is maintaining a body line tight enough to allow you to mostly use your hands and maybe shoulders to manipulate your position. And the third is creating a push into the floor with your shoulders, both to support the body line, but also to create space for your other hand when you start walking. So let's go through each of those 3 and I'll show you some drills you can use to help understand them. CrossFit is obsessed with body line as if that's the only thing that is important in a handstand, but it's number 2 on my list. Number 1 is actually keeping your center of mass in the middle of your hand. If we were to stand on one foot and then pop up onto the toes, you expect your foot and ankle to be working overtime to hold you in place. The thing is, handstands actually work the same way. It's not this passive magic holding point that you arrive in the middle of your hands. You're constantly balancing through your fingers to hold you in position. That can be a challenging concept to grasp, but it's also inconvenient because we have to develop these muscles. So let's start with the easy access version of learning to shift into the middle of our hands. I've stolen this from yoga, and it's a really nice way to start introducing ourselves and our members to getting the balance in the middle of our hands. But we don't have to go upside down. It doesn't feel scary or high risk, and it's accessible to most people, so I really like it. One of the biggest surprises with the crow pose is that people are always shocked at how far forward you have to shift into the hands. A lot of people feel like they get stuck on the ground until they understand how much they have to keep shifting forward to be able to achieve the crow pose. So let's have a look at it on the ground. In the crow pose, I like to start exposing people to the hand positions they're gonna use when they're upside down. So I like a fairly spread hand because that's gonna help people have more surface area of the ground to work with. I like to tell my members to look for evidence that they are moving their weight forward in the hand. So that might be the whitening of the end of the fingertips, it might be the knuckles popping up. Any of these signs that the weight's coming forward are a good thing for our handstands. So from that position, knees go on the triceps or the elbows, and then we simply shift forward as far as we need to until the feet leave the floor for free. Notice I didn't have to push, kick, shove, find my way off the floor aggressively. I literally just kind of tipped into place. So nice and slow, gentle shift. I grip the ground to prevent my face from falling on the floor, and I'm holding here. It can help our members feel safe to just put an ab mat there or a soft pad so that if they do tip forward, they're just bopping their head on a little squishy thing versus slamming into the ground. But if a member's feeling really afraid of this, it's probably a sign they're not ready to do anything upside down anyway. When I program this, it's usually just as like a, 60 seconds of playtime type thing for the members. It's like, hey, just do this for a minute, see how you go. And I like to encourage them to think about, what do they feel in the hand? Do they feel the change in pressure? What do they notice the second their feet leave the floor? And what happens if they bring their weight back to here? Do they come back down onto the ground, or are they able to hold that position? So this is helping them start to understand that the weight truly needs to come way further forward in their hands than they think, and that same pressure will be reflected when they go upside down. So now that they've got that sensation locked in, we can take them into some of our handstanding drills and they'll make a whole lot more sense. This next one is what I call a float drill, and the word float is really important there. When I say float, I mean there is no kicking, pushing, momentuming, yeeting. It should all be really slow and really controlled. That said, the first mistake all of your members are going to make is to try to start pushing off the box or wall. So when you're taking them through this, that's kind of going to be your job, is looking out for that temptation to push. The reason that we want it to be a controlled float is because as we shift the pressure from one object to another, in this instance, we go from the box to the wall, you're going to pass through a moment where the pressures in your hands and the line of your body is essentially correct for the handstand. So we want people to be able to move slowly into that position, because otherwise they will miss it entirely. If they push off the box with the goal of getting to the wall, they will essentially just surpass the entire point of the drill, which is actually the moment of float in the middle of their hands. Don't tell your brain that the goal is to arrive at the wall. Tell your brain that the goal is to arrive in your hands. Just slow down and kind of actually appreciate the drill for what it is. Okay, so let me show you what it looks like. We're gonna have this set up with the box next to the wall. Important thing to understand is the box height will determine success quite a lot. I am both short, I'm 5'4", and I'm quite flexible. So the height of this box is appropriate for me. If you're taller or tighter, guys, girls, whatever, are probably going to need a bit more height than this. I've used up to 48 inches with tall boys before who are like 6'3" and above. So don't be shy about adding height to your boxes. Don't turn it into a flexibility contest. The hands in this drill really need to go right between the box and the wall. So we do this sort of awkward wall walk into position. My knees are still bent here. Hands are in the middle. And then I'm going to reach up with my leading leg, and I'm shifting my body weight over the middle of the hands. Now notice that shift comes from the entire body. I'm not actually pushing with the foot to arrive here. And then once I'm in the middle of my hands, my foot should be able to just leave the box for free and eventually find the wall. Now people's temptation will be to potentially close down this shoulder angle. They'll get stuck if they do that. Even if they get the stacking right, they might try to be pushing off of here. You really need to disallow that and encourage them to think, have you achieved the same sensation in your hands as you had in your crow pose? Because that will allow you to know that you found, the middle of your hands in your float. Now, the only other way that you can make this dangerous for your members is if you let them bend the elbows. It is crucial to their safety that we make sure the elbows stay locked here, and we try to keep the biceps by the ears, pushing through that position. If they can get those two things, they basically just get to tick-tock between the box and the wall, and that's a super stable way for them to explore finding the center of mass over the middle of their hands, remembering they have to really shift it forward from the outside edge of the palm in toward the fingertips as they arrive in their float position. Generally, programming-wise, I will do this as sets and reps. I'll say do 5 sets, try to achieve 1 really good float. It might take you 3 reps before you get one that you're satisfied with, and that's okay. All right, now let's get rid of the box. We're gonna do another float drill, but this one is just going to be off the wall. Conceptually, this is exactly the same as the float from box to wall. We're just doing it from a wall-facing handstand and then using the same mechanics. So if I were standing, pretend here, this is my upside down, right? So I've got my feet on the wall and I've got my hands on the ground. If I were to want to stand up, the way I'm going to do that is literally just, you saw me do it. I shift my hips and my shoulders over my feet, and now I'm standing. Your members are going to struggle with the float concept, so they're going to try to push themselves up into position. This is already actually quite hard compared to just pulling my body weight over the middle of my feet. So when we're upside down, it works exactly the same way. That I want to find myself into my wall-facing handstand. Big, strong elevation at the shoulders. You can cross the legs to prevent them from cheating if that helps. And then they're just drifting the shoulders and hips over the middle of the hand. And the foot will eventually leave the wall for free because their center of mass is correctly positioned over the hands. Now here, the fingertips are going to have to work quite hard to hold them in place so that they don't overbalance going that way. But this should be the beginnings of understanding how a float works just by getting the shoulders and hips to stack over the center of the hand. Now, the way I program these is quite similar to the box float to wall. I can either do it as sort of sets and reps. Quite often I'll say, you've got a 5-minute time cap. I want you to try to get 3 really nice floats where you don't overbalance immediately or underbalance straight back to the wall. Just try to hold for a second and then return. Or if you fall over, it's no big deal. I just want you to have that moment where you're like, oh, I'm in my hands. That's great. So I'll do it as a time cap. You're like, 5 minutes of playtime. Or I'll do it if they start to become more competent. I'll say, hey, I know you can get a float. Let's see if you can achieve 5 floats in 10 minutes. And then it will become, all right, cool, you're getting really good at that. Let's do 4 sets where you do 3 holds off the wall and you deliberately return every single time. And then eventually it becomes, hey, I want you to do 3 sets of a 10-second hold where you then return to the wall within that same rep scheme. And then you can develop it into like, cool, you peel off the wall, you hold 30 seconds and you're done. So it's a very easy concept essentially to progress in your handstand holding drills. The heel pull that we're about to do is essentially the same thing as the toe pull, but we're facing the other way. I like the heel pull for 2 reasons. One is that it can be a really good strengthener for the muscles that need to be highly engaged during your handstand holds. And also because it helps with that finding the center of mass in the middle of the hands, just coming from the other side. So it can be quite helpful to have sort of like both sides of the coin where we move from this side of the hand or move from this side of the hand into the middle. So let's have a look. So we're going to kick up into our handstand hold. The closer I am to the wall, the easier this is going to be. So we then obviously elevate, find our position. Also helpful here to cross the legs. If you think your members are going to cheat, you don't have to. From there, we get the shoulders and hips over the middle of the hands, and then the fingertips basically do the last pull off the wall. I quite like doing this with either pointed toes or the legs crossed, just because otherwise people really do kick off the wall quite hard. So big elevation, shoulders, hips over the middle of the hand, fingertips do that last little pull off the wall, and now I'm in my handstand hold. I can come down, and I've essentially used my fingers, head rush. I've used my fingers to close down that angle, strengthen this, and that action is what pulls me off the wall. So if I then go a little bit further away from the wall, we'll see even more activity having to happen through the fingers for it to work. So we can see that with each slightly further position off the wall, my fingers have to work slightly harder to peel me off the wall. Oh, that one's hard. So you can see there's quite a bit of work there involved, obviously, in using the fingertips to pull me off the wall, but also that the moment that I arrive in my hands, I have those same hand pressures that I did in my crow pose and in my toe pulls. Those 4 drills are basically what I use to help my beginners and intermediates understand the concept of moving from that outside edge of their hand that they probably favor in toward the center of their hand and learning to manipulate with their fingers. Now let's move on to the next step, which is finding that body line position so that they can use that more effectively with the rigidity produced from shoulders to toes. Your hands are only going to be able to help stabilize you if you maintain enough rigidity in your torso to allow that to happen. So this section of drills is probably going to be a lot more familiar because of, as I said, CrossFit's obsession with the body line component of the handstand. And it is valid. We do need to be able to control this. There's an important distinction, though, between the hollow body that we coach as our foundational gymnastics move and the shape that we need our torso to make during a handstand. In the hollow body, we are pretty much maximally crunched between the hips and the pelvis. We have that fully retracted rib cage, and we are shrugged. Some of those things need to stay in the handstand. We still want the shrug. We still want a little bit of that retracted rib cage so that we aren't sticking out with the ribs, and we need a little bit of tuck at the pelvis. We don't, however, need that full crunch because that's not going to get them into a handstand position. We need, instead of a crunched position, we just need this to be essentially flat. And I don't mean flat stomach as in washboard abs. I just mean like the shape between here and here isn't spilled out forward through the spine. Despite having all of that tension, we don't want so much rigidity that people feel like they can't breathe or that they can't move little bits and pieces, which can actually really support their journey to understanding how to balance in the hands. There's some kind of sweet spot on this floppy to rigid spectrum where we have enough tension to hold position, but we're still able to breathe and create little micro adjustments with our balance. It's actually okay for this to contribute a little bit to the balancing piece, as long as it's not just, totally squish. So we want our members to understand that, 1, they're not maximally contracting their abs. They shouldn't be able to, it's not that kind of an ab contraction. They do need some pieces of the hollow body, that little bit of a retraction of the rib cage, that little bit of tuck of the pelvis, and the shrug. That's going to be enough for their handstand hold. So let's do a couple of drills. 2 of them exaggerate that position, and then they'll start to see how much of it they actually use when they go upside down. This is my favorite line drill. I stole it from my friend Sid Paulson. Excellent handstand guy. Go check him out. So your legs are going to go on the foam roller and your hands are going to go on the plate. A slightly higher plate is actually easier. So if your members gravitate toward a 5-kilo plate because they think it's going to be lighter or easier somehow, get them to go for something larger. Hands come up onto the plate. Obviously the foam roller is lifting my legs up behind me, and I'm then going to retract my rib cage and tuck my pelvis under like I was talking about to create that sort of version of a hollow body that we see in the handstand. It'll look like this. Here. So nice big shrug, pressure down into the plate, retraction of the rib cage, and tuck of the pelvis. We can do this for reps, or we can hold. This next one is our plank to wall plank. So we're taking that same position that we found on the floor and we're bringing it across to the wall. Now, I really like this one because it sort of enforces the shrug of the shoulders. So you want people to be basically one arm's distance from the wall. And then notice my shoulder is directly over the middle of my hand. If you say shoulders over hands, people usually come slightly behind it. So I like to cue shoulders over knuckles, and they'll end up where you actually wanted them to begin with. So from that high plank position, we alternate from the floor to the wall, which only works if there's a little bit of pressure up into the wall. It's really hard to do it, fairly impossible to do it without a little bit of that push into the wall. And the other thing we're looking for is that strong plank structure. So like I said, that retraction of the rib cage, that little tuck of the pelvis, bit of a squeeze at the glutes and quads. That's going to help hold them in place as they do this drill. I like to see people able to do a solid 20 reps, as in like this is one rep where both hands come up and back down before I expect them to be strong enough to hold their handstand positions really well. So from that plank to wall plank, we can then start going upside down. I like first going into our 45-degree position, which is sort of like half a wall walk, and using that position to reinforce good shapes. So we go into our wall walk. You can get them to start on the ground, whatever. And then from here, we do all the same things that we did in the previous line drills. So we shrug, we retract the rib cage, we find that little tuck of the pelvis, we're squeezing quads, squeezing glutes, everything is long. We can either hold this position, we can walk it laterally if we want to start clocking up some reps on the straight arms, or we can bring it into a top half wall walk where they come just between the fully vertical position and this position, and we're just checking every time, do we have hollowed out ribs, slightly tucked pelvis, push at the shoulders, hitting those 3 little, KPIs, I guess, if you will. That will tell us that they're ready to be able to bring it into the upside down vertical position on the wall. As you can see from the plank to wall plank and from that 45-degree handstand drill, the reach and the elevation at the shoulder is quite important to helping control the shapes of your handstand. Now, not everyone is going to have the shoulder mobility that I do, and that's okay. We're just going to ask them for as much of that shrug as they can create. If they can't shrug and reach their arm that high over their head, they'll make up for it here. And I know that's starting to break the rule or target, I guess, of the retracted rib cage. So we're just going to ask them for however much mobility they've got, use all of it. Like really try to reach for it with the understanding that hopefully they're also working on their mobility and we're encouraging them to get better at that over time. Now, based on those shapes that the person can or cannot make, we can either do handstand walks on easy mode or hard mode. And I have a very strong preference for easy mode for those that are able to do it. The way we create easy mode for people is by, when they walk, using the whole shoulder complex, that full reaching system, your traps, your lats, your shoulders, everything that is contributing to that elevation here, so that they can then essentially just sweep that arm around without having to do a big old monkey bend at the arms. I like to call this the wax on, wax off Mr. Miyagi thing. Maybe that's an old reference. I don't know. I'm old. But we want that like reach, shrug, sweep, shrug, sweep, shrug, sweep to be happening as we handstand walk to minimize the amount of elbow bend. The same way that a barbell feels really heavy if it's kind of like bent out the front in a jerk versus fully elevated and shrugged in that position, that's going to feel a lot lighter. Bones are stacked, much easier for you to hold versus struggle straight here. So first place that we can encourage people to feel that nice massive shrug at the shoulders is with this box walking over plate drill. So let's have a look at this pike walk over plate drill, and I'll show you what I mean. As we come into our pike and we do that kind of awkward wall walk thing I'm talking about, we want to be relatively close so that my hips are stacked over my hands here. Now I can step onto the plate by doing a big old elbow bend, but that's going to be really inefficient. So we're looking for that big shrug through the whole shoulder complex, push up, sweep across, and come back down. Push up, sweep across, and we can really exaggerate that shrug when we show our members how we're doing it. That's going to help them understand that big push and reach as they come over the plate so that they don't have to load up quite so heavy with the bent elbow. Now this next one is the same concept of stepping over a plate and having to create that push. So we're just going to do it as a lateral handstand walk over the plate. You can do these either wall facing or facing away, but I think because I like to use them as a handstand walk progression, you're going to be in a little bit more of a walkie style position if you go heels to wall. So that's how I typically do it with people, but I have no issue with using a toes to wall position. So you're kicking up. Same thing. We're still looking for that big shrug elevation at the shoulders. Step, step. Now I'm mobile enough that one plate is comfortable for me to be in this narrow handstand. You may find for some of your bigger or less mobile people that you actually need to go 2 plates. And yes, they'll have to walk a bit further, but at least they won't have to be in that super narrow handstand position that they simply might not be able to do right now. So just think about that in terms of your setup and then roll with something that's going to work for the majority of people in the room. In terms of programming both the lateral handstand walk over the plate and the one on the box, I usually give this for sets and reps. So I might say 3 sets of, 6, meaning, or 6 total passes over the plate so that they can practice it that way. And then you can obviously increase the reps for more endurance, or you can increase the distance. You can give them, you can make an obstacle course if you want to, whatever. You're just going to increase the challenge over time. All right, this last one combines a couple of the earlier drills that we've done. So we had the toe pull where we pulled off the wall into the middle of our hands and tried to hold there with our chest facing the wall. And we're also combining the walking drills with that sweeping arm. So this is obviously our kind of most advanced progression. So we find our way into your wall-facing handstand, and then you're going to do the same thing you did with your toe pull. We drift the shoulders and hips over the middle of the hand, eyes between the thumbs, and when we overbalance, we begin walking. Notice those long elbows not bending substantially, moving as much from that shoulder complex as we can. So we're really looking for the combination of that reach push from the shoulders and the overbalance, the controlled overbalance that is the handstand walk. So that's it. Those 3 things will be enough to get you and your members better at handstand holds and walks. All you need, arrival of your body mass in the middle of your hands. You need sufficient body line and tension to be able to hold it there, and you need the shrug and movement of the shoulders to be working for you so that you can turn that into a handstand walk. At no point there did I say you have to hold for 10 or 30 seconds or whatever standards exist, because if we see competency in those 3 arenas, we will probably see someone who is ready to start handstand walking for CrossFit. Let me know if you have any light bulb moments from this. We've already had loads in our gym using my gymnastics programming. We're getting really good feedback on the results that those members are getting from exactly these drills. And if you or your affiliate wants to subscribe and run that class at your gym, you can check out the links below.